All right, so I think it's time to clear the air a little bit about what's happening in Portland. So we have all of these leftist mayors sitting there going, we don't want the feds will make it worse, blah, blah, blah. You know, the mayor of Chicago just came out and said, we don't want the feds there because, you know, we can handle it. Chicago's a war zone, like a literal war zone. People are dying in Chicago at the same rate they're dying in, like, war zones. That's just a fact. It's been that way forever. As a matter of fact, it's up like 50% this year. 50% from already, holy crap, it's a war zone. So, I don't know, you don't have it under control. And then you got places like Portland, right? Ted Wheeler sitting there going, we want the feds to leave. Y'all need to leave. If you don't leave, we're going to say mean things because we can't really do anything because we can't. And you have them lying. You have them lying and saying things like, well, it was already de-escalating, so we didn't need the feds to come in and rile everybody up and screw everything up. Here's the problem with that. It de-escalates every 4 days. Yep, every 4 days, you have like a lull, right? Where there's just not as many people out. They took a day off. And then, you know, the next day, there's still a lot of people again. Or the next day there's a lot of people again. Like, they might have a couple days, but it's a trend. It's how it happens. You're gonna have, you know, nights where there's 1,000 people. You're gonna have nights where there's 30 people. And there's been a lot of nights where there was only 30 people, but then the next day there was a couple hundred. And they were destroying property, and they were breaking things, and they were beating people up, and they were breaking into buildings, and they were doing all sorts of these crimes, vandalism, theft, felonies, essentially, and Portland police didn't do anything. There's even a day, if you go back and look on the YouTube channel I have a video titled "Police Run Away from Protesters," because they did. The protesters literally chased the police out of town. Gone. Disappeared. They won the city. 100%. And to blame the feds on any sort of escalation, I had a lady on Twitter try to correct me a couple days ago, when I said that the protesters started the fight at the federal building. I was down there that night that the protesters decided to pick the fight with the federal building. They were burning this big old bonfire at the Elk statue, and they were pulling boards off of the federal building. They were pulling, you know, plywood off the walls to burn. And this whole time, they're like, there's nobody even in that building. It's just boarded up. Nothing's going to happen. And then a couple FSPs decided to pepper ball a couple people that were pulling the boards, and they said, no, you're not going to do that anymore. And then all of a sudden, there was a shift. Everybody's like, hey, there's cops in there. Because at this point, Portland police stood down completely. Portland police would not engage at this point. So all of a sudden, there's a new law enforcement agency out there that's talking back. So people started focusing on the federal building. And there were protesters sitting there with bullhorns going, no, don't mess with the feds. Our fight is not with the feds. Our fight is with Portland Police Bureau. That is a direct quote. Don't mess with the feds. Our fight is with the Portland Police Bureau. And he said it repeatedly. And people were like, nah, screw the feds too. They're just as bad. Screw the feds too. They're just as bad. And from that point on, because the Justice Center, they took the fence down. They let the protesters have all they wanted to do in front of the Justice Center. They took all the fences down. They took all the lights down. They let the protesters do whatever they wanted. They lit all the statues on fire. They sat there and just destroyed the parks. And the protesters were, nothing left to do. So let's go poke the other bear. And that's exactly what they did. They started poking the federal bear. The protesters started it, 100%. And yes, I know there's going to be people going, well, you can't call them protesters. I'm like, all right, whatever, rioters, whatever you want to call these people, they did it. They started it. And these leftist mayors sitting there going, we don't want the feds to come help and take care of, the problem in our city, because Portland is shut down. Like, for the most part, Portland is completely shut down in downtown. there's very few businesses that can open. There's a couple that do, but they're all like the social justice businesses that know that no matter what, they can open up and nobody's going to mess with them. Nobody's going to break their windows. But, there's banks that are closed. The malls are closed. Portland is shut down because of the violence. And just last night, there was a jewelry store that was, that was busted into. But that had nothing to do with the feds. Nothing to do with the feds. That was Portland. Jewelry store. Cleaned out. What I wonder is whether or not the feds are going to actually take care of business. Because right now, all they're doing is protecting the federal property. That's all they're doing right now. They clear the property, they clear the park, they pretty much create like a 1 block radius around the federal property, and then they stop. They don't continue on past that. They don't chase them through town like Portland Police Bureau does. They don't do any of that. And here's another thing. Here's one more thing before I end this little spiel here. And that is, you want to blame the feds for all the violence and stuff? It was just 2-3 nights ago that there were 2 different events going on. 2 different events. One in front of the federal building and one in front of the Portland Police Bureau Union Hall. And the Union Hall caught on fire. Blame the feds for that too, right? Or maybe blame the feds for all of the officers that have been hurt, right? Because it's the feds doing it. It's the protesters aren't sitting there sending cops to the hospital. It's not the protesters that are trying to light the buildings on fire. I mean, there's footage out there, guys. You can go look at it yourself. You can see the footage for yourself. The cops sit there and they take a lot. They put up with a lot. There's a lot of destruction that goes down before the cops even say hello. That's a fact. There's thousands upon thousands of hours of video evidence to prove it. If you honestly, truly want to sit there and lie and say peaceful protests, there's nothing anybody can ever do for you, because you are proof that liberalism is in fact a mental disorder.